The forest lay in deep slumber, still beneath the silver glow of dawn. The trees, ancient and wise, stood like quiet sentinels, whispering only when the wind dared arouse them. Somewhere in the heart of this forest, a nest shivered high on a trembling branch of an old cedar, and inside it, a little bird opened her eyes. She was the last to hatch. Her feathers were patchy, her beak tiny and curved awkwardly, and compared to her siblings, she looked weak and forgettable, while the others chirped boldly, pushing to the edge of the nest and stretching their wings in excitement. She stayed curled in the center, watching, waiting, wondering. They called her Mira. Mira heard her siblings talk about the skies. Their dreams were loud. One day, chirped her oldest brother, I'll soar above the clouds and race the hawks. Another added, I'll reach the sun and dive into golden clouds. They giggled, full of life, full of belief. But Mira, she looked down. Below the nest was a steep drop, a carpet of sharp rocks and twisted roots. One wrong move, one failed flutter, and that would be the end. The very idea of falling haunted her sleep, and each time her wings twitched, she remembered that she was smaller, slower, different. When the time came for first flight, one by one, her siblings took off. Wobbly, yes, but determined. Their wings weren't perfect, but their hearts were bold. Mira stood at the edge of the nest, eyes wide, heart pounding. The sky called her name, but her fear screamed louder. So she stayed. Days passed. Her siblings didn't return often. They were learning, exploring, growing strong. Mira remained in the nest, watching them rise higher each time they passed above. Sometimes they laughed. Sometimes they shouted for her to join. Just jump, Mira. The air will catch you. But Mira couldn't move. Her wings ached from lack of use. Her legs trembled whenever she approached the edge. The world below seemed far too cruel for someone so small. And then one morning, the winds changed. Dark clouds smothered the forest. Thunder cracked like a warning drum, and the cedar tree groaned under the weight of the coming storm. Mira felt it. Something inside her shift, a deep thud, a primal pulse, like a whisper from her own bones. The nest shook violently. A branch snapped nearby. Mira flapped frantically to stay inside the nest, but the winds were too strong. The twigs scattered. The home that had held her since birth broke apart. She cried out, wings spread wide, not in strength but desperation. And just like that, Mira was falling. Down, down, down. Her heart raced. Her beak opened in a silent scream. The wind roared past her ears. And then something primal took over. She flapped. Once, twice, a third time, and the fall slowed. Her wings found a rhythm she didn't know they possessed. The panic in her chest slowly morphed into something else, something electric. Her body, once fearful and weak, responded with grace. Mira was flying. Not gracefully, not elegantly, but enough. She soared through the storm. The rain lashed at her wings. The thunder tried to scare her back to earth, but she didn't stop. Every beat of her wings screamed against a voice in her head that had always said you're not enough. That voice, fed by fear, drowned beneath the power of movement. And then, as she cleared the dark cloud, Mira found herself staring at something she never imagined. The sky, endless, expansive, blue and gold, painted by the fingers of dawn. It was beautiful, and it was hers. In that moment, Mira didn't think about how she was different. She didn't remember the fear or the fall. She only felt the wind beneath her, holding her up like an old friend she never knew she had. But it wasn't over. The storm hadn't passed entirely. Below her, the forest wasn't the same. The winds had uprooted trees, thrown nests to the ground, and scattered creatures in panic. Myra's siblings were nowhere to be found, and the tree, the cedar that once held her nest, now leaned dangerously to one side, its roots exposed, its body cracked. She hesitated. She could keep flying, find a new place, start again. But something called her back. Not fear, no, responsibility. Mira dived toward the wreckage, her wings slicing through wind and rain. She weaved through branches and falling leaves, eyes scanning every crevice, every broken limb. And then she saw it. A baby bird, newly hatched, alone, trapped beneath a fallen twig. It wasn't her sibling. It wasn't anyone she knew. But it was helpless, shivering, just like she once was. Myra's heart clenched. She could fly now. She was free. She didn't have to stay. But what was the point of power if she couldn't use it to lift someone else? She landed next to the chick, flapping hard to steady herself in the wind. She nudged the twig off with her beak, gently cooing to calm the baby's cries. With effort, she guided the chick to a small hollow under an arch root, just enough cover to protect it from the storm. Hours passed. Mira didn't fly away. She stayed, watching, guarding. And when the sky finally cleared and the storm faded into mist, the forest sighed in relief. Birds emerged, nests were rebuilt, and life began again. Myra's siblings found her near the base of the cedar, tired but alive. They saw the chick she had saved. They saw the mud on her feathers, the dirt on her wings, and the fire in her eyes. "You flew," her brother whispered. "I fell," Mira replied with a small smile. "And then I remembered I had wings." The others grew silent, and in that silence, something changed. Mira, the weakest of them all, the one who feared the sky, was now the one who had braved the storm, not only to survive, but to protect. She had found her power not in the absence of fear, but in facing it. Her story spread. Other birds began to look up to her, not because she was the strongest, but because she understood weakness. She had tasted fear. She had known doubt. And still she had risen. Because sometimes the ones who fall hardest are the ones who rise the highest, not because of who they were, but because of what they chose. And Mira? She chose to believe that her wings weren't broken. They were simply waiting for the right moment, waiting for the storm, waiting for her to realize the power had been within her all along. The sun rose higher the next morning, spilling golden light across the forest floor. Dew shimmered on every leaf, and the trees, though bruised from the storm, stood tall once again. In the heart of the woods, under the shadow of the broken cedar, Mira blinked into the daylight. Her wings were sore. Her body ached. But inside, something had changed. She was no longer afraid of falling. The chick she'd saved was still asleep, safely nestled in a bed of moss Mira had gathered before dawn. She watched its tiny chest rise and fall and realized something strange. She hadn't thought of herself once since the storm began. Her entire focus had shifted to something bigger than fear, purpose. As the wind gently tousled her feathers, Mira understood. Power wasn't just about flying high or being noticed. It was about what you did with your wings when others couldn't fly at all. She flew again that morning, not to escape, not to prove anything, but because she wanted to. Because now, her wings weren't tools of survival. They were symbols of strength. She soared above the forest, tracing every curve of its canopy, watching as the world slowly healed after the storm's wrath. Birds returned to their nests, squirrels repaired their homes, and sunlight pierced through even the thickest patches of gloom. But Mira didn't stop. She had a different mission now. She began to visit nests at the edge of the forest, homes where other birds were too afraid to teach their young to fly again. Shaken by the memory of wind and thunder, she perched beside those nests and told her story. She told them how fear had paralyzed her, how she had watched others rise while she stayed behind, how she had fallen and found flight. At first, they listened in silence, but slowly, something remarkable happened. A little robin who hadn't flown since the storm stretched her wings and asked, "What if I fall?" Mira smiled gently and said, "Then you'll learn how to fly." A sparrow who lost half a wing during the wind's approached, voice trembling. "But what if I can't rise as high as the others?" Mira looked into her eyes. "Then you rise as high as you can. And that's enough." The forest began to change, not because the storm had left, but because Mira had stayed. And in staying, she became more than a survivor. She became a guide, a mentor, a leader. Birds that once doubted themselves now took off together in small flocks, not to race the hawks, not to reach the sun, but to learn slowly, gently, faithfully. They didn't fly to escape fear. They flew with it. And Mira? She kept flying, Not always high, not always fast, but always with purpose. Until one day, the sky darkened again. Another storm was brewing. The animals sensed it. The birds scattered, frantically preparing. Nests were fortified. Branches were abandoned. This time, the clouds were blacker, the air thicker. It wasn't just a storm. It was a test. Mira knew she couldn't fly away from it, so she did the unthinkable. She returned to the tree line and found the tallest branch still standing. She perched there, high above the forest floor, and spread her wings. Open, welcoming, defiant. As the first drop of rain struck her back, she let out a single, echoing chirp. It wasn't a cry of warning. It was a call. One by one, other birds began to land beside her. Some were small, some broken, some still trembling from past storms. But they came, not because they weren't afraid, but because someone had shown them what it looked like to face fear and still stand. The wind howled. Lightning cracked the sky. And still they stayed, because courage isn't the absence of storms. Courage is facing the storm knowing you might fall, and flying anyway. That night, they didn't scatter. They soared. Together, dozens of birds, once afraid, once doubting, now formed a swarm of strength. They didn't rise above the clouds, but they rose above their fear. They danced through the wind, shielded one another, chirped encouragement mid-air. And in the center of it all, Mira, leading, not with force, but with faith. The storm raged, but it couldn't touch what had changed inside them. It couldn't reach that hidden place, the one where belief burns stronger than lightning, where hope flies faster than wind. When the storm passed, the forest looked up and saw them, wings extended, eyes bright, hearts alive. Something shifted that night. Mira became a legend, not because she was the biggest or the strongest or the first to fly, but because she was the one who dared to fall and still found the sky. Word of her journey spread beyond the forest. Birds from distant lands came seeking her wisdom, not to hear a hero's tale, but to feel seen, to feel understood, because Myra's story wasn't about perfection. It was about transformation. She taught them that it's okay to be the last one out of the nest, that falling isn't failure. It's the beginning of rising, that your wings don't have to match others. They just have to lift you. And above all, that the power you seek outside is already within, waiting, quiet, hidden beneath fear, but alive. She never returned to her old nest. That branch was long gone. But Mira didn't need it anymore. Her home wasn't a place. It was a purpose. And her wings were no longer just hers. They were a promise. To everyone who ever doubted themselves. To everyone who ever looked down and saw nothing but failure. To everyone who ever whispered, "I can't," Myra's story answered with a single truth. Yes, you can. You may be small. You may be broken. You may have stayed quiet while the world moved on. But none of that defines you. What defines you is that moment when the storm comes back and you spread your wings, not because you're ready, but because you're willing. That's the power within you. That's a little bird in your soul, trembling, yes, but still choosing to fly. So, to you who's watching this right now, maybe you've been in the nest too long. Maybe fear has wrapped its claws around your spirit. Maybe you watched others fly while you stayed behind. But hear this. You are not weak for being afraid. You are not broken for needing time. You are not lost just because you haven't taken off yet. Inside you, there's a mirror waiting. A little bird, small but fierce, terrified but unstoppable. And the moment you choose to flap your wings, just once, you'll begin to feel it. That power within you, the power to rise, the power to lead, the power to become something no one, including yourself, ever expected. Not because you never fell, but because you rose after you did. That's what makes you strong. That's what makes you unstoppable. So fly, even if your wings shake, even if your heart pounds, even if the world below is waiting. Fly, because the sky isn't for the perfect. It's for the brave. And the power? It was never out there. It was always inside you, just waiting for you to believe.